Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before we jump in, just a quick reminder to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Really helps us out.
Yeah, please do. It makes a huge difference.
Awesome. So, to start things off today, I want you to picture something for me. Picture the home you live in right now.
Okay.
Maybe you painted the nursery yourself, or maybe you spent a weekend patching the drywall in the hallway, or you laid down those hardwood floorboards in the living room.
Right, putting the sweat equity in.
Exactly. Every single nail you drove in, every drop of sweat, it was essentially a promise of safety, right? You were building a refuge from the outside world, a real sanctuary.
Yeah, that's how we all think of it.
But what if the very walls of that home, the basic grammar you use to speak to your partner over breakfast, and basically the institutions you rely on every single day were actually subtly engineered into an unregulated tribunal? A courtroom where you are always permanently the defendant.
I mean, that is a staggering hypothetical, and it completely upends the way most of us are socialized to think about intimacy and domestic life, like the whole bedrock of modern society.
Right. And that unsettling premise is exactly what we are exploring today. Our mission for this deep dive is to completely unpack a fiercely debated, highly polarizing 2026 ebook. It's by Sophia Marie Eve Riker.
And the title alone is heavy.
Oh, yeah. It's titled Violence Against Men, Lying, Paternity Deceit, Family Law Inverting Justice, and Invasion of Male Spaces. And by the way, if you want to follow along or read it yourself, you can check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book. Just search the title.
Yeah, just the title tells you we are wading into incredibly deep, turbulent waters here. The author has essentially constructed this massive, almost microscopic architectural mapping of modern gender dynamics, law, and language.
She really has.
And our job today is to take that map apart piece by piece, gear by gear, to see exactly how she claims this machine works, especially understanding the history of our institutions before they were captured by feminists and Marxists, which is a massive theme in this book.
Absolutely. It's written directly for an audience of, well, men's rights activists and red-pilled manosphere men who feel the system is structurally rigged against them. The book promises to give them the vocabulary to understand exactly why they feel that way.
Right. But before we take another step, we need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener. We are about to discuss highly charged political, cultural, and legal arguments.
Very charged.
Yeah. As your guides on this deep dive, we are not taking sides, we are not endorsing this worldview, nor are we, validating or invalidating the claims made in the book.
Right. No endorsements here whatsoever. We are treating this strictly as an analytical exercise.
Precisely. Our goal is strictly to break down the original source material. We're going to impartially report on the author's logic and help you understand the precise mechanisms she alleges are operating just beneath the surface of our society.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the sheer scope of the material we've been reviewing is just wild.
It's massive.
I mean, we're looking at excerpts spanning the book's 12 chapters. It covers everything from family court data to clinical psychological frameworks, deep linguistic analyses of verbs, and all the way to bureaucratic consent instructions in HR.
Yeah, it leaves no stone unturned.
So instead of just walking through it like a table of contents, let's start where the author starts, right at the front door of the house. Chapter 1 introduces this concept of the Trojan horse of domesticity.
Right.
The core argument is that the modern household has been transformed from a sanctuary into a tribunal where male provision is weaponized into leverage. So how does she claim we got from home sweet home to, unregulated tribunal?
Well, to understand that, the author argues we have to look at a pivotal shift in the legal landscape of the United States. According to the text, the turning point, the moment the tectonic plates of the culture shifted, was 1969.
1969, okay.
Yeah. That was the year California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the nation's first no-fault divorce law. Over the next decade or so, this legal doctrine spread to almost every state in the country.
Right.
Now, on the surface, this was billed as a massive leap forward for personal freedom, right? A way to end the stigma of failed marriages. But the author argues we really need to look at what this did to the mechanics of the legal contract.
Wait, let me try to wrap my head around this. Because 1969 feels like ancient history to a lot of people listening.
Yeah.
How did it actually work before that? Like, if I wanted to get a divorce in 1965, what did I have to do?
Under the old system, which was fault-based, if you wanted to dissolve a marriage, the plaintiff had to actually prove something objective in a court of law.
Like what?
Adultery, desertion, extreme physical cruelty, abandonment. As the author points out, these were demonstrable falsifiable events.
Okay.
A claim had to be tested against physical evidence, timelines, bank statements, or witnesses. Couldn't just walk in and say, I'm unhappy. You had to prove a breach of contract.
So it was empirical. You had to bring receipts.
Exactly. The court operated on the presumption that a contract existed. And to break it, one party had to be at fault, and that fault had to be materially proven.
Right.
But the book argues that with the introduction of no-fault divorce, the legal bar completely collapsed. It went from requiring demonstrable fact to requiring merely subjective distress.
Ah, I see.
The term we all know now, irreconcilable differences, it isn't a factual finding of an event. The author calls it a legal formula. Conflict didn't disappear from the divorce process, it was just uncoupled from evidence.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the author's thesis is that marriage suddenly became a zero-sum game of storytelling. The party who can marshal emotional language most effectively carries an insurmountable structural advantage. And the book asserts that women are socialized from childhood to master this exact type of emotional fluency.
I really want to pause on that because it's a massive claim. It's as if you signed a standard contract for a mortgage, right? Think about it.
Look,
You sign the papers, you move in, you make all your payments on time for 10 years. Every single month the check clears.
right, you're doing everything right.
But then one day, the bank forecloses on your house. Not because you missed a payment, not because you breached any objective term of the contract, but because the bank manager felt uncomfortable with your tone during a routine phone call about an escrow statement.
Yeah.
If a bank did that, we'd call it insane. It would be front page news. But the author says this is exactly the dynamic that plays out every single day in family court.
And the book highlights a highly specific case from 2022 to illustrate just how far this logic extends. It involves a Midwestern father who had been married for a decade.
Okay.
According to the text, this is a guy who pays the mortgage, coaches Little League, and has a spotless record as a co-parent. There is zero history of violence, zero criminal record.
So a totally normal, upstanding guy.
Exactly. One afternoon, he sends his wife a single text message. It is exactly 11 words long. He simply asks why a $400 charge appeared on their shared credit card statement. That's it.
Just a basic administrative question about household finances. I mean, everybody does that.
Right. But what happens next is where the author's theory of the tribunal kicks in. His wife's attorney takes this 11-word text message, prints it out, and in court frames it as, quote, financial surveillance constituting coercive control.
And the court agreed. That's the part that is so jarring to read. The text says they ordered supervised visitation.
Yeah, supervised visitation.
A guy who built this life, who physically provided for his kids, is suddenly only allowed to see them with a state-approved stranger watching his every move, taking notes in the corner of a sterile room. All because he asked about a $400 credit card charge.
This is precisely what the author means by the home becoming a tribunal. The text emphasizes that the legal standard in that courtroom didn't ask if the child was physically safe. It asked if the mother felt psychologically uncomfortable.
Wow.
And because she claimed she did, 10 years of documented provision, stability, and fatherhood evaporated instantly.
Okay, but I have to push back a little here on behalf of the listener. Because this redefines the whole concept of safety, doesn't it?
It does.
When most people hear the word unsafe, they think of physical danger, a burglar, a fire, an abusive partner throwing plates. How does a court look at a text about a credit card and classify it under the same umbrella as physical violence?
That is the exact pivot point of the author's argument. This is a crucial redefinition that the book zeroes in on. The author argues that historically, in law and society, safety meant freedom from physical threat.
Right.
It was a material claim. But over the last few decades in modern domestic discourse and family law, safety has been completely unmoored from physical reality. It has been redefined as freedom from cognitive friction, freedom from critique.
Or, as the author provocatively puts it, freedom from the presence of a man who disagrees with composure.
Exactly. So safety basically just means freedom from psychological discomfort.
That is wild.
Yeah. The text argues that equivocating physical danger with emotional discomfort is the foundational category error of modern family law. When a court rules that a mother feels unsafe because of a father's aggressive tone in an 11-word text, the author argues that what they are really punishing is a lack of emotional difference.
I see.
His mere existence in the room, his audacity to ask a question about shared finances, was insufficiently apologetic. But a man asking about missing money is not a predator. So when safety is redefined this broadly, every single mundane disagreement, is magically reframed as an act of violence.
It's a total shift in the gravity of the room.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the person who asks the logical question is the aggressor, and the person who feels stressed by the question is the victim of violence.
Exactly.
But if physical spaces like the home and the courtroom have been restructured around subjective feelings, how is this shift actually maintained day to day? I mean, you can't have a lawyer present every time you argue about who is taking out the trash.
No, you can't.
The author argues that this is sustained through everyday communication, specifically what she calls a grammar of gaslighting.
This is one of the most fascinating sections of the analysis. The author refers to grammar as the most invisible weapon in the gender wars.
Invisible weapon. I like that.
Yeah, it's brilliant in its subtlety because it doesn't look like a weapon, it just looks like a stylistic preference. The book argues that the passive voice has been engineered into a linguistic device specifically designed to launder female agency and inflate male guilt.
Right. Think about the phrases we hear all the time. The relationship broke down. Mistakes were made.
Yeah.
Money was spent. Things got out of hand.
Yeah.
The person who actually did the thing just vanishes from the sentence. It's like the event just floated down to the sky.
To illustrate the power of this grammatical trick, the book pulls a striking example from media coverage. It cites a highly publicized case from 1997 where a 34-year-old female schoolteacher raped a 12-year-old student.
Oh, I remember reading about this in the book.
The text points out how the media covered this crime. They consistently use these passive, almost romanticized phrases. The headlines read, "An affair began. The relationship developed. They fell in love."
It sounds like a tragic romance novel, not a felony.
Exactly. And the author contrasts that sharply with the active voice the media reflexively reserves for male predators. If the genders were reversed, the headlines would be "Teacher molested student," "Coach groomed minor," "Man assaults child."
The difference is night and day.
The argument here is that when a woman commits an act of harm, the passive construction doesn't necessarily make her innocent in the eyes of the law, but it shifts the moral burden from a criminal act to a tragic narrative. It generates a fog of sympathy. It completely disappears her agency.
It was decided without me. It was spent without me. The passive voice is the official language of dispossession, as the book puts it.
Yes, that's a great quote.
That is such a sharp insight. But it's not just the passive voice operating in isolation. The author brings in a clinical psychological framework to explain how this linguistic evasion actually plays out in real-time arguments. It's an acronym called DARVO, D-A-R-V-O.
Right, DARVO is a concept originally mapped by the psychologist Jennifer Freyd. It was designed to describe how actual perpetrators of severe abuse manipulate their victims. It stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's a well-documented phenomenon in clinical psychology, but Riker argues that this clinical tool has been completely co-opted.
Co-opted how?
She says it is now functioning as a daily domestic operating system by ordinary women in ordinary disagreements to maintain power and avoid accountability.
Bring this down to earth for us.
Yeah.
How does the book say this works in a typical kitchen table argument? Walk us through the steps.
Let's use the missing money example again, as it perfectly illustrates the escalation. A husband sits down at the kitchen table with a bank statement. He notices money is gone.
Okay.
He calmly asks his wife, "Hey, do you know what happened to the $300 from the joint account?" Step 1 of DARVO is deny. She denies taking it, or she denies that it's a big deal. I don't know what you're talking about. It's just a few bucks.
Right.
Step 2 is attack. She attacks him for the mere act of asking, "Why are you always interrogating me? You're so controlling. You never trust me. You're obsessed with money."
So she deflects the objective threat, the missing money, by attacking his character.
Precisely. And then comes step 3, the coup de grace reverse, victim and offender. By the end of this 10-minute argument, the narrative has completely flipped.
How so?
The man who calmly asked a factual question about a bank statement is now actively apologizing for his financial abuse and his controlling behavior while she is crying because her piece was stolen. The original issue, the missing money, is completely forgotten.
Wow. The narrative inversion is complete. The investigator is now the defendant.
Yes.
And there is a fascinating psychological insight the author points out here about men, specifically why this trick works so well on them. She says that conscientious men are uniquely vulnerable to DARVO
And why is that?
because men are generally socialized from birth to fix things, to resolve problems. If a pipe is leaking, you patch it. If there is a misunderstanding, you clarify it.
Yes, and that exact socialization becomes their trap. When the Darva pivot begins, the book says the conscientious man fundamentally misreads the situation. He mistakenly treats the strategic narrative inversion as a simple communication failure.
He thinks it's a misunderstanding.
Right. He thinks, oh, she misunderstood my tone. She thinks I'm accusing her, but I'm just asking. Let me explain it better so she feels safe. So he engages in what the text calls Jade E. He begins to justify, argue, defend, and explain.
Jade E. Think about the last argument you had, listener. Did you find yourself Jade E? No, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant you start justifying your tone, arguing your intent, defending your character, explaining your rationale.
But the author warns that JD is the worst possible response. It is the oxygen that turns the spark into a raging fire. Every justification a man offers is taken as further evidence of his guilt.
Really?
Yes, every logical explanation is seen as an emotional escalation. The man thinks he is bringing clarity and resolution to the table, but the system and the partner is processing it as aggression. He brings a timeline to prove his innocence, and she collapses the chronology into effect. She says, the fact that you made a timeline proves you are cold and calculating.
It's maddening. But here is the critical pivot in the book's thesis. A linguistic trick at the kitchen table is one thing. It's frustrating, it ruins your weekend, sure. But how does this scale up?
That's the real question.
Because a bad argument with your spouse is very different from losing your career, your reputation, or custody of your children. The author argues that this exact narrative structure, this elevation of subjective feeling over objective fact, hasn't just stayed in the kitchen. It has achieved what she calls institutional capture.
Yes. The argument here is that the mechanisms of the family court, where female distress automatically equals evidence and male facts automatically equal aggression, have become portable.
Portable.
Right. They have migrated outward, infecting almost every bureaucratic structure in society. The author maps how this Darvu dynamic now operates as the default logic in human resources departments, university Title IX offices, and even in public spaces like parks and grocery stores.
The portable tribunal. I love that phrase because it captures the terror of it perfectly. You carry the courtroom with you wherever you go.
Yeah.
And the book uses a very famous, very public incident to dissect exactly how this works in real life.
Which one?
The 2020 Central Park birdwatching incident with Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper.
Ah, yes.
Now, most of the world watched that video and labeled her a Karen. The internet consensus was that she was a racist anomaly who lost her mind. But the author frames Amy Cooper totally differently. She doesn't see her as a glitch in the system. She sees her as a, quote, legal and therapeutic product deploying a perfectly formatted script.
It's an incredibly provocative, contrarian analysis of a viral moment. The book points out that when Christian Cooper, a man birdwatching in the park, politely asked Amy Cooper to put her dog on a leash according to park rules, she didn't just get angry and yell, she executed a specific sequence.
A sequence.
Yes. She pulled out her phone and stated, "I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life." She then dialed 911 and artificially elevated her breathing and vocal pitch to simulate terror. The author argues that Cooper wasn't acting irrationally. She was acting hyper-rationally based on the rules of the new system.
So she knew exactly what she was doing.
She expected, with absolute supreme confidence, the institutional enforcement of her subjective distress.
She knew the cheat code. She expected the 911 dispatcher to act as her personal judge, and she expected the NYPD to arrive and act as her bailiffs. She didn't need evidence that he was threatening her. Her performance of fear was the evidence.
Exactly. The text argues that a generation of women has been implicitly taught that their internal feeling of being unsafe is legally operative. It acts as a public warrant.
A public warrant.
Yeah. And the script relies heavily on a classic logical fallacy, affirming the consequent. The logic goes like this. I feel threatened. If I were actually in danger, I would feel this way. Therefore, because I feel this way, I am in danger, and you must be the aggressor.
That is terrifying logic.
The book states that our public institutions are now designed to absorb her distress as an unquestionable signal of truth, and to treat his mere physical presence as a dangerous variable that must be managed and neutralized.
And if you scale that up even further, away from public parks and into corporate America, the author points to what she calls the Kafka trap. To illustrate this, she dissects the 2017 case of James Damore.
Right, the Google engineer.
For those who don't remember, he was the guy who wrote that infamous internal memo about biological differences and the gender gap in the tech industry.
The author notes that Damore's behavior was the exact opposite of a threat. He didn't shout in a meeting. He didn't corner anyone in a hallway. He didn't use slurs or call anyone names.
Right, he was just sharing data.
Exactly. He wrote a sterile, heavily footnoted document citing peer-reviewed evolutionary psychology and biology studies. He used measured, corporate language. But within days of it circulating, female colleagues reported feeling unsafe. Again, they were not physically threatened by a PDF document, but they were deeply uncomfortable.
And the institution, one of the most powerful, data-driven corporations in human history, agreed that discomfort equaled danger. They fired him.
This is the essence of the Kafka trap the book describes. A Kafka trap is a situation where your denial of a crime is taken as proof that you committed it.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. In Demore's case, the subjective feeling of safety acted as an absolute veto over objective truth. The author argues that in the modern HR department, if a man demands evidence for the claim that he is making people unsafe, that very demand for due process is presented as further proof of his oppressive, aggressive nature.
So he's trapped.
Completely. He can't prove his innocence because the very structure of the system dictates that his desire for a trial is proof of his guilt. The institution no longer investigates facts, it processes liabilities.
But wait, let's step back and look at the motives here. Why would an HR department or a university or a court operate like this? If they just want to resolve conflict and find the truth, why embrace a system that actively avoids evidence?
The author's answer is cynical but fascinating. She says you have to follow the money.
Okay, where does it lead?
She points directly to the 1994 Violence Against Women Act, commonly known as VWA, and the Duluth model of domestic violence intervention. The economic argument in the book is incredibly stark and heavily documented. The author claims that VOA didn't just change laws, it created a massive self-perpetuating funding apparatus.
Like federal grants.
We are talking about billions of dollars in federal grant money showered on domestic violence shelters, police training programs, and advocacy groups. But crucially, that funding depends entirely on a steady, uninterrupted supply of processed male offenders.
She writes this line that just jumps off the page in the book. A domestic violence shelter that processes 0 male perpetrators loses its grant money.
Right, it's a basic bureaucratic reality. If a bureaucracy solves the problem it was created to address, it ceases to exist.
Yeah.
And the author pairs this economic incentive with the ideological framework of the Duluth model. The Duluth model, which heavily influences almost all law enforcement training regarding domestic disputes in the U.S., posits that domestic violence is not caused by substance abuse or mutual toxicity or psychological issues.
What does it say causes it?
It posits that violence is fundamentally rooted in patriarchal power and control, and is therefore almost exclusively male perpetrated. The author argues that because of this intellectual architecture, combined with the Violava funding pipelines, the bureaucracy fundamentally seeks complaint minimization and funding maximization rather than objective truth.
So if I'm understanding this right, the author is saying these institutions actually possess a structural incentive to tolerate and even reward the Darvo dynamic. They need women to feel unsafe and report it because it continuously manufactures the exact problems they are paid millions of dollars to solve.
That is the core of her institutional critique. The system isn't break-in, it is functioning exactly as it was economically designed to function.
Okay, so this brings up a massive question. If these institutions are heavily incentivized to process men as offenders and they are using subjective feelings as their primary evidence, what happens when a man figures this out?
Right.
What happens when a man walks into the room with actual hard evidence? I mean, a spreadsheet, text logs, receipts. The author argues there is a massive asymmetry of proof where the system structurally rewards female narrative fluidity and actively penalizes male literalism.
The book illustrates this asymmetry with an incredibly vivid, almost cinematic scene. I want you to imagine a standard family court hearing. A man walks in, and he is prepared. He places a massive 47-page 3-ring binder on the table.
Oh boy.
It has authenticated receipts, timestamps, printed text message logs, and a perfectly constructed chronological timeline of events. On the other side of the room, the woman brings no documents. She brings tears, emotional distress, and a story that keeps shifting on cross-examination.
Okay.
The text argues that structurally the man with the binder loses.
But why? I have to push back on this. Judges or lawyers, they go to law school. They are trained in the rules of evidence. It's hard to believe a judge would look at hard bank statements in a shifting story and say, I prefer the lie. Logically, the binder should win every single time. How does the author actually prove that the system ignores hard evidence?
Because of how the evidence is interpreted through the lens we just discussed, the author argues that his factual precision, the very act of bringing a meticulously organized binder, is pathologized by the court.
Pathologized.
Yes, it is diagnosed as sociopathic coldness or rehearsal. The judge looks at the binder and sees an attempt to control and dominate the narrative. It's viewed as a symptom of his underlying pathology. Meanwhile, her contradictions, her lack of evidence, and her shifting timeline are not seen as lies. They are praised as the fragile honesty of a traumatized survivor.
Wow.
The system interprets her emotional volatility as the ultimate proof of authenticity.
To bring this out of the theoretical, the book uses the 2022 defamation trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard in Fairfax, Virginia, as the ultimate globally broadcast dissection of this dynamic. The author says society was asked to choose between a boring, exhaustive pile of authenticated facts, audio recordings, police body cam footage, witness testimonies, and a highly compelling, emotionally fluent lie.
And to explain why the public, and often judges and juries, naturally lean toward the emotionally fluent lie, the text brings in a fascinating concept from behavioral economics. It cites the research of psychologists Norbert Schwartz and Ewart Newman on a phenomenon called processing fluency.
The author brings up Schwartz's work on processing fluency. If I'm understanding this right, it basically means our brains are inherently lazy. We mistake an easy-to-listen-to story for the actual truth because it takes less energy to digest. Am I getting that right? Or is there more to the neuroscience here?
You've hit the nail on the head. In neuroscience terms, processing complex contradictory data burns a significant amount of glucose in the brain. It is metabolically expensive to evaluate a 47-page minder.
That makes total sense.
Processing fluency is the idea that human beings are roughly 30% more likely to believe a coherent, emotionally satisfying, simple story than a complex, disjointed, technically accurate factual account. Our brains treat narrative ease as a proxy for truth. A smooth, emotional narrative glides into the brain without friction. A jagged, complicated set of facts requires effort. So the brain defaults to the easy story and labels it true.
It's exactly like junk food. Our brains evolved to crave sugar and fat because they're easy calories. A smooth, emotional lie is the junk food of information. A 47-page binder of financial records is like a massive plate of raw kale.
That's a great analogy.
It's good for you, it's the truth, but your brain doesn't want to chew on it. And the author says women are socialized from childhood to provide that narrative ease, to speak in emotional realities, while men are socialized for factual literalism and problem solving. This reminds me of the brilliant analogy the book makes about true crime documentaries.
Yes, the documentary framing is a perfect example of this double standard in action.
Think about it. You're watching Netflix. When a female subject in a true crime documentary changes her story across 3 episodes, she says she was at the store, then she says she was asleep, then she says she can't remember. What do the filmmakers do?
They bring in an expert.
They bring in a trauma expert in a cardigan. The expert looks earnestly at the camera and says, "Trauma fragments memory." The fact that her story is so inconsistent actually proves how deeply she was traumatized. Her lie is framed as proof of her victimhood. But
Yeah, what happens when it's a guy?
if a male suspect is perfectly consistent, if he tells the exact same verifiable story to the detectives every single time, what does the documentary do? The camera zooms in on his face, they play that dark, sinister cello music in the background, and his consistency is framed as rehearsal, calculation. He's a psychopath because he remembers Tuesday.
The author calls this the ad hominem of effect. It's a brilliant term. It means the argument itself, the actual facts of the case, isn't refuted. Instead, the speaker's emotional register is diagnosed. Her tears are evidence for her. His calm composure is evidence against him.
It's a lose-lose situation.
And the trap is, if he were to break down and cry, his tears would also be evidence against him. They would be viewed as proof of instability or manipulative self-pity. The system operates on a complete inversion of the burden of proof, effectively making male acquittal nearly impossible.
Okay, so if this asymmetry operates unchecked, if it's humming along in our courts, our media, our HR departments, what are the macroscopic effects? We've talked a lot about the micro level, the kitchen table arguments, and individual lawsuits. But what does this do to a civilization over 50
The
years?
stakes are incredibly high.
The author argues it leads directly to the literal economic and cultural erasure of fathers.
Section 10 of the book focuses heavily on this macroscopic fallout. The author asserts that fatherhood has been systematically reduced from a position of profound social, moral, and developmental authority to a mere funding mechanism, a walking ATM. heavily subsidized and managed by state intervention.
A walking ATM. Ouch.
To trace the history of this, the text cites Charles Murray's highly influential and controversial 1984 work, Losing Ground.
Charles Murray is a lightning rod. How does the author use his specific arguments to explain the modern family court system?
Murray's core argument in Losing Ground was an analysis of incentive structures. He demonstrated that the massive expansion of welfare programs in the 1960s and 70s fundamentally altered the economic reality of the lower and middle classes. The author uses his sociological data to argue that the state essentially made single motherhood financially rational and two-parent households financially punishing.
How so? Can you give an example?
For example, under certain welfare structures, if a single mother married a working man who earned even a modest income, she immediately lost her housing subsidies, her medical benefits, and her food assistance. The financial cliff was so steep that the rational economic choice was to keep the man out of the house.
So the argument is that the system didn't just accidentally permit fatherlessness, it actively priced it as the optimal economic strategy. The government effectively subsidized the removal of the father from the home.
Exactly. The state replaced the father as the provider, rendering him economically obsolete except as a target for child support extraction, which the state then manages and takes a cut of. And the author runs through some incredibly stark, undeniable data to show the fallout of this social engineering.
The statistics she provides are absolutely brutal. Children raised without active, biological fathers in the home are exponentially more likely to face severe risks across every metric of human flourishing. They are roughly 4 times more likely to live in poverty.
Yeah.
They have vastly higher rates of depression, anxiety, and teen pregnancy. And the most staggering statistic, Defwicht, 85% of youth in prison come from fatherless homes. 85%.
But the author goes a step further than just pointing out the benefits of fathers. She makes a very controversial claim regarding data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, regarding who is actually harming children.
Right. And this is where the book claims the narrative completely inverts reality.
According to the CDC data cited in the text, children are statistically far more likely to be abused by a mother acting alone than a father acting alone. Furthermore, the data shows that biological mothers are responsible for the majority of child maltreatment fatalities.
And the author's point here isn't just to throw numbers around or demonize mothers. Her point is about how society and the media handle those numbers when they contradict the established script, right?
Yes. The text argues that the media, academia, and legal institutions systematically bury, ignore, or therapeutically reframe this data through a psychological mechanism called gamma bias.
Let's break down gamma bias, because I had never heard this term before reading the book, and it explains so much.
Gamma bias is a cognitive distortion where the system interprets the exact same behavior completely differently depending on the gender of the actor.
Okay.
Specifically, it treats female violence or female failure as an aberration, a tragic result of trauma, systemic stress, or postpartum depression. It's an anomaly. But it treats male violence or male failure as an essence, a fundamental, inescapable flaw of masculinity itself.
I see.
So when the CDC data contradicts the profitable narrative that men are the primary danger to children, the data is simply ignored to protect the funding structures and the ideological framework we discussed earlier.
It's a perfectly closed loop. But there is another piece of data she brings up that I found mind-blowing. There is a huge section here on paternity deceit.
Yes, chapter 11, I believe.
The book claims that peer-reviewed genetic studies show non-paternity rates, meaning situations where a man is raising, loving, and financially supporting a child he believes is biologically his, but actually isn't, are between 1% and 3% in the general population.
Oh,
But
yeah.
in cases where paternity is already disputed and DNA tests are ordered, the rate jumps to up to 30%.
Almost 1 in 3 disputed cases. And the author's overarching critique here is focused on the legal system's reaction to this reality. She points out that the court treats this massive, multi-billion-dollar misdirection of resources and emotional labor as a private, closed-door family matter.
Which is crazy when you compare it to other crimes.
Exactly. If you defraud a bank of $100,000, you go to federal prison. If a woman defrauds a man of hundreds of thousands of dollars in 20 years of his life through paternity deceit, the court often forces the man to continue paying.
Because of the best interests of the child standard.
Right. Ostensibly, yes. But the book argues this standard is a smokescreen. The author claims this is done deliberately to protect the institutional extraction of the father's assets. The state doesn't want to step in and support that child, so it forces the defrauded man to keep paying. The court, she writes, doesn't demand proof of biological parentage, it demands strict compliance to the revenue stream.
It is an incredibly bleak, almost dystopian architectural map of society. If you buy the author's premise, the language we speak is rigged, the family courts are rigged, the HR departments are rigged, and the entire economy of the family is rigged to extract male resources while denying male authority.
It's a lot to take in.
So, what on earth is the author's prescribed response? If a listener is sitting in his car right now, or painting his hallway, and he recognizes his own life in these pages, what is he supposed to do?
The author is very explicit and very cautious about the solution. She explicitly states that the solution is not rage. She writes a rule that is repeated throughout the final chapters. Rage is evidence.
Rage is evidence.
If you get angry at the injustice of the tribunal, you feed the machine exactly what it needs to convict you. Your anger will be packaged as abuse. Instead, she advocates for a disciplined, almost monastic return to logic and boundaries, which she formalizes into what she calls the counter-logos protocol.
The counter-logos protocol. It sounds like a defense mechanism out of a sci-fi movie, but it's actually rooted in ancient philosophy.
Yes, the author grounds this entire protocol in classical Stoicism, specifically referencing the philosopher Epictetus. Epictetus famously was a slave. He was physically dominated by his masters, his body was not his own. But he realized there was one domain they could never touch, no matter how much power they had. His mind's absolute power to withhold dissent from a false premise. The author applies this ancient realization to modern men facing institutional or domestic tribunals.
Withholding assent.
Exactly. The core tenet is this: no accusation achieves force until the accused accepts its premise.
So how does a man actually withhold assent practically? How do you do that when your partner is screaming at you in the kitchen or HR is calling you into a Zoom meeting? The book outlines what it calls the forensic ladder.
Yes, these are very practical tools.
These aren't abstract ideas, they are actual tactical tools for communication. The first rung on this ladder is separating event versus interpretation.
This is crucial for surviving Darvo. The text gives a very common example of an accusation. You always ignore me. You make me feel so neglected. The author says a man operating under the protocol must instantly break that sentence down. The event is, I sent a text at noon and received no reply until evening. That is a falsifiable fact. The interpretation is, I felt neglected and unimportant. That is a subjective feeling.
The event can be proven true or false, but the interpretation belongs entirely to the person feeling it. The author says men instinctively try to resolve the feeling, which leads them right into the J trap, justifying and explaining, which inevitably leads to a confession of guilt.
Yes.
The protocol says acknowledge the feeling, but do not accept responsibility for the interpretation if the event doesn't warrant it. You say, I understand you felt neglected, but the fact is I was in a meeting and couldn't look at my phone. End of sentence. Do not apologize for the meeting.
The next tool on the forensic ladder is the sex swap test. The author argues this is the fastest way to expose the invisible double standard of power operating in the room.
How does that work?
If a man told his girlfriend, I feel unsafe and traumatized because you disagreed with me in front of our friends at dinner, society would immediately label him as a controlling, fragile, emotionally abusive narcissist.
The police might legitimately be called. His friends would tell the woman to run.
Right. But if a woman says the exact same sentence, institutions rush to validate her trauma and punish the man. The author says if an accusation collapses into absurdity or abuse under gender reversal, it isn't a plea for justice, it's a covert power move. And once you recognize it as a power move, you must stop treating it like a legitimate grievance.
And then there's the top rung of the ladder, the mirror standard, which directly tackles that passive voice grammar we spent so much time talking about earlier. The protocol says you have to force translation. You have to translate passive therapeutic accusations into active, literal, male-coded language.
For instance, if the accusation in HR or at home is, I felt pressured into doing this project, the mirror standard forces you to translate that subjective fog into objective actions. It becomes, someone asked me to do a task, I verbally said yes of my own free will, and now I regret my choice.
It completely strips away the therapeutic fog and forces accountability back onto the actor. The author argues that if the translated active version sounds petty, vague, or ridiculous, then the original passive accusation was just a weapon to avoid responsibility.
Yes.
The protocol dictates that you must demand a specific act, a specific time, and a specific location. If they cannot provide the who, what, when, and where, you must calmly walk away.
It requires extreme, almost superhuman emotional discipline. The author advises men to completely stop JEing, stop justifying, stop arguing, stop defending, and stop explaining. Instead, start documenting. Treat every interaction with the precise, emotionless rigor of a structural engineer.
That's a perfect analogy. Think about it, listener. If you were a structural engineer building a skyscraper, you don't get angry at gravity.
Right, that would be crazy.
You don't scream at wind resistance. That would be insane and pointless. Gravity doesn't care about your feelings. You simply mathematically calibrate the steel and concrete to withstand those exact predictable forces.
Precisely.
The Counter-Logos Protocol is about building a life so heavily documented, so logically bound, and so emotionally disciplined that it can withstand the narrative forces and the institutional gravity trying to knock it down.
Ultimately, the author is telling men that they must define the terms before they obey the commands, and they must verify the facts before they pay the price. They must transition from being passive victims of circumstance and emotional manipulation to becoming active, stoic judges of reality.
Okay, we have covered massive ground today. We've looked at the history of no-fault divorce in 1969, the weaponization of passive language, the clinical hijacking of Darvo, the institutional capture of HR and family courts, the Kafka trap, the asymmetry of proof driven by processing fluency, the economic erasure of the father, and finally, this intense counter-logos survival protocol.
It's a really comprehensive map.
It really is.
Yeah.
Whether you view Sophie Marie Eve Riker's book as a radical, vital revelation of hidden truths, or as a deeply controversial, cynical critique of modern institutions, she has undeniably constructed a comprehensive, highly detailed architectural map of gender dynamics, language, and law.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. A question that is inspired by the meticulous architecture of this text, one that looks out beyond it into the future of our society.
Okay.
If the author is entirely correct in her mapping, if the only way to survive modern intimacy and family life is to treat your own home like a hostile corporate environment, requiring forensic discipline, constant documentation, hidden cameras, and the complete stoic withdrawal of vulnerability, what happens to the human capacity for actual love?
Wow.
Can a civilization actually survive, let alone flourish, if its foundational unit, the family, is held together not by grace, trust, and mutual vulnerability, but by the cold, calculated threat of mutually assured legal destruction?
That is a heavy, profound, and deeply tragic question to mull over. It really gets to the heart of what we lose when everything becomes a tribunal. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Again, if you want to explore this architectural map and read the source material for yourself, go check out the ebook Violence Against Men on Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books.
And make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack to keep up with her ongoing work.
Yes, definitely do that. And please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel before you head out. Stay curious, stay analytical, keep asking the hard questions, and we will see you on the next deep dive.